All right, so the book of Job, a complex book. The chapters, is it 40, I think? Let's look and make sure. 42 chapters dedicated to these opening two chapters of the scene that we get a glimpse into the heavenly realm, right? So we get this perspective where Job doesn't get, and the friends do not get. So basically Job is a book that bad things happen to Job. Job tries to reason why that happens. The friends come along and try to console him in ways that aren't very consoling. And then God shows up and gives His defense. But after we get this glimpse in chapters 1 and 2, it's never mentioned again. God doesn't give His reasons to Job, nor does it really ever answer the question as to why it happened. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to look at this morning. I'm going to try to do 2 weeks on this. So the design of Job is intentional. It cranks up this tension. So we look into the very first chapter and we get this glimpse, and here's the accuser and saying, well, why is this, Job's only doing this because you bless him. And so you come in and we know, we've seen, right? We see chapters 1 and 2, and we see that God is having this discussion with the accuser. And we're like, we know better. We know that there is this tension that's created because Job doesn't know. And the friends don't know. And so we are given these moments where, and the three friends come along and the first one speaks and Job answers. The first one says, well, of course bad things happen to you because you're the bad person, obviously. Who does these things? God doesn't do these things to good people. And then the second one comes along and he even accuses and says, well, look, Job, your friends got what they deserve. Or I'm sorry, not your friends. Your children got what they deserved. And, so why wouldn't you get what you deserve? And so there's this tension that's growing in the book that God is just kind of not a part of in the first part, other than being accused. Because Job is stuck defending himself. Job is righteous. We know that. God knows that. Job knows that. And the friends come along and say, no, you aren't. It's obvious that you aren't. And then the third friend doesn't get to speak, but then we are introduced to this fourth friend that kind of has a different perspective on things, and so we'll kind of look at that, but it gives you this tension. It makes us uncomfortable because eventually Job starts throwing out accusations toward God. And so I want to talk about that a little bit this morning, because when bad things happen to us, so many times what are we either told, or what do we tell ourselves? Don't question God, right? We say, well, that's not for us to understand. We say, well, why do bad things happen like this? And we're like, well, that's just God. We have tens of chapters here that question and just give a place for Job to cry and to cry out. And for 7 days, when the friends first come up, nobody even says a word. They just sit with Job in his misery. So we've got to, any of us who have been in a bad situation, any of us that have been given bad news or have been through a death of a loved one, especially one that was unexpected, or any of us that have been in a place where we cried out, "Why, God?" God gives room for that. And I want to really encourage you all that even though Job never really answers the question of why, and I don't want you to think that when I conclude with this book, you'll be like, that's why God did that to Job. Well, no. Because Job, like a lot of other books of the Bible, leaves a question hanging at the end and says, well, here is the arguments, here are the rules, here's what's going on. What's your conclusion? And so I want to encourage us to go through and in our deepest pain and in the moments of life where we don't understand, take courage, you have not been alone. You can open up to the Psalms and you can see the Psalms cry out in the moments of pain. And you can also find moments of victory in the Psalm, right? You can find different Psalms for different times and places, and you can find victory and anguish. You can find times where God is found and where you're like, where is God? And so I just want to take a minute and just, because a lot of times we don't give room for that. We're like, I can't believe they acted like that. Can you believe that? You believe they acted like that over that? And we don't understand what's going on in people's minds, and we don't give grace and so much judgment on our behalf because we feel like we understand. We feel like we know the story. We feel like we are, and we almost show up like a friend. And after 7 days of sitting, we start giving our opinion. And I want to really be careful with this because I too am one of the friends. I'm not going to be able to give you an answer. God shows up at the end and throws out a bunch of questions. But God never says, well, this is why. So I don't want you to expect me to be like, when we leave this, you'll be like, oh, well, of course. Of course that's what's happened. So we begin with the knowledge of Job's righteousness. And God says that in two places, the book of Job, it says in 22, in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. And in all this is chapter 2, verse 10. In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. So 2 places God acknowledges, or at least the storyteller tells that Job is righteous. Has nothing to do with that. So we are left to question the policies of which God rules the universe, right? So we know that, so we have 3 books of wisdom. We have Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and we have Job. Proverbs says, for the most part, if you do thus and such right thing, then thus and such right thing will happen to you. Right? So we always, one of the famous ones is, bring up your child in the way it should go, and they shall not depart in it. Right? Is that always the case? I got some shaking of the head. I mean, y'all can talk to me. It's okay. Is that always the case? No, it's not. So does that make the Bible wrong? No. Proverbs gives the wisdom by which God has set up the universe without the complexities. Because then Ecclesiastes shows up and says, yeah, wisdom is something, but it's not always going to go the way we think it's supposed to. And so you have what the people I've followed after this, they call the cynic. So Proverbs is like, or not Proverbs, but Ecclesiastes is like, yeah, we see that these things exist, but it's not always the case. Yes?
One thing I take from this is when something goes wrong in somebody's life, they want to blame God.
They do, absolutely. They want to blame God.
God didn't have anything to do with what happened to Job. But through the whole ordeal, Job never did go against God. He asked him questions, but he didn't go against him.
Well, so when we say that God didn't have anything to do with what happened to Job, that's true in a sense, but it's also not true because he allowed it. He said, and so we'll get into that further, but
And then again, he proved the point to the devil that Job wouldn't deny it.
and he ended up, but Job ends up in this place of torment where he's like, why? Where are you, God? What is going on here? What have you done to me? And eventually he accuses God. He says things like, well, you're the reason that whole villages are destroyed, or it's something like that. We'll get into that further probably next week. But
His wife and all his buddies tried to get him to deny God.
that's exactly right. So, yes, Rita.
Sometimes it goes in his communion meditation lesson. Why did God allow Jesus to suffer so much before when he didn't even let the lamb suffer that much?
Right.
So it goes into that. We don't know. He's the judgment.
Well, and that's what we want to look at is God's justice.
That's what it is.
Yes, JD.
Most people, if they're not churchgoers, if they have a tragedy or whatever, the first thing they do, God, why did that happen to me? And then they pray that you take it away.
Right.
It's like a double negative thing.
Right. They want God to do something on one hand, but then question Him on the other. Yeah. So we want to look at why does God do what He does? What we have. What kind of universe do we live in where good people suffer, and what does that say about God's character? Because that's ultimately what Job is about. We don't really look at why good people suffer. We want to know why is God allowing this to happen. What does this say about God's character? Because it never really answers the question of why good people suffer. So I want to talk about something that's a pet peeve of mine this morning. I think it's one of Crystal's too. Karma. Who can explain to me karma? Somebody just, you see it all the time. People say, well, that's karma. Karma's a blankety blank or whatever. And what do they usually mean by that? You get what you deserve. Boy, karma's something. That phrase irritates me to death. I cannot stand that. One of the reasons is because I look at it from a biblical standpoint. But I see people, religious people, that use that in ways that are obvious because they are witnessing the world from a standpoint of what they obviously aren't seeing in the Scripture. Because what is karma? Getting what you deserve, right? It all comes back around, whatever. And we see that in Jesus' principle of reaping what you sow, right? You see things like that. But like we said, is that always the case? Do you always reap what you sow?
Not necessarily on earth, but you do eventually.
Right. But the question is, how do we even deal with it on earth? And that's one of the things that Ryan.
There's a sense in what you reap what you sow. If you put a bean in the ground, you will get a beanstalk.
Right.
And sometimes your bad deeds come back to haunt you because you made someone angry, and now they're going to get you back.
Right. So this retribution.
Right. But the idea of karma is that there is a cosmic bank account that the universe is somehow going to pay you back for what you did, because that's the way it works. And then we see now that's not necessarily
Right.
the way it works. So there's a sense in which that principle is true,
Right.
but not in the way.
Not in the way that we, as Christians and as a Jewish reader here, would have looked at that.
Who controls the cosmic bank account is God.
Is God.
And we see that God doesn't always act that way.
Right. And so we want to understand why. And here we are. We're in this place. We as Western thinkers, we want to know the why. We want to know, tell me what happened to Job and tell me why it happened, and I need to understand how God judges the universe, because I need to know these things. That way I can plan my life accordingly, and then when bad things happen, I can be like, well, it's because this and so. And so, we simply become one of the friends. I'm so...
John,
Yes.
sometimes you can put the effort in and really put the effort in, but you don't get that result.
And that is exactly right. So let's talk about, let's say you work hard for a promotion at work or something like that, and you don't get it. I mean, you have put everything into that. And let's say not only that, but someone who is completely undeserving gets it.
If you go around with the old saying, chicken one thing, feathers the next, you'll find out most time it's true.
That's right. So we want to. So let's give us let's say something like, okay, tell the truth, right? Tell the truth. We must tell the truth. God says, "Do not bear false witness" in one of the commandments. We know that telling the truth is always the right thing to do, right? Who has been caught in a lie by their child in one form or fashion? Yes.
In a joking way, like most of the time, but I wouldn't lie to them directly.
Yes, you weren't exactly lying, but you weren't exactly telling the truth either. Sometimes the truth is complex, isn't it?
Based on their age.
Well, that's true.
Yes.
So there has been times when, you might be caught in a place where to a child what you have done is wrong. But as a parent with a much wider view of complexities, so let's give you a biblical example. Joshua 2:2. Some of you will know where I'm going with this. Who's got that?
The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here to spy out the land."
Keep going a little bit.
So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab: "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from."
So did Rahab tell the truth? No. to a child or to it becomes complex. So, Rita, you teach this in a Sunday school setting. Well, first you're talking about a prostitute, so there's one thing you're trying to juggle. And then the next thing might be, well, why do these guys end up at a prostitute's house, when they go to a foreign place? And so there's problem number 2. And so problem number 3 is Rahab tells a lie, and the Bible never takes care of it. Eventually, she is in the genealogy of Jesus, right? So is lying wrong?
Yes.
Yes. But to choose lying to save 10 people's lives, is that wrong? To save 100 people's lives, is lying wrong? To save 1,000 people's lives, is that wrong? Is lying wrong? Yes.
Undercover police officers do it all the time.
And we look at that and we say, it's part of their job. Undercover police officers do that for a living.
I think they're doing that right now. They can't tell everything.
Right. So, we find ourselves in a complex place. And sometimes a complex place does not always work out simplified, does it? We want to tell the truth. And I'm not telling you all to go out and lie today, then it's okay. But what I am saying is in a big world with deep meanings and complex workings, you cannot always have a checklist of rights and wrongs. So difficult. And to hold God to that standard can also not be applied. We cannot hold God to checklists. God has done this for me, this for me, this for me, this for me, so He is a good God. And He has not done this for me, this for me, this for me, this for me, so He is not a good God. And that is the complexity of Job, because Job is struggling, wanting God to be so righteous and just, but knowing his innocence. So we have this triangle. We have God's justice at the top, right? We have Job's innocence at this corner, but at this point of the triangle. And we have the retribution principle by which God judges the universe here. And so, almost the karma almost here. So, Job knows that he is innocent, and he knows that God judges by the righteous recompense here, so it must mean that God is not just. And the friends come along, and they know that God is just, and they know that God judges by righteous principles. So that must mean Job is wrong. And in the end, God comes along and knows that He is just and knows that Job is innocent. So what is left to question? How God rules the universe by just principle and still be able to run a complex universe with multiple things and ends and outcomes that we cannot fathom. we cannot understand and we cannot assume that we know.
He's the potter, really. That's what comes.
He is the potter and we are the clay. So where does that leave us? Job knows his innocence. God knows his justice. And the friends think they know that there is justice in the world.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hey,
I've wondered, I guess none of those friends suffered to the degree that Job and Job's wife suffered, right? But somewhere along the way, those friends were going to get sick. Somebody in their family was going to die, maybe not in tragic, sudden circumstances like Job and his wife lost all 10 of their children. But the friend who thought, this is a perfect system,
right.
when something happened to him or his family, how was he going to process that himself? I must have done something wrong, or...
And a lot of times we throw the blanket statement out that says, well, Job must have sinned somewhere in his life. He couldn't have been perfect. You know, so we throw that out there as kind of covering God. But God never brings that up. God never says, okay, well this, of course Job did something down the line. He's defending Job in the very first part of the book. And the accuser comes along and says, well, it's only because you bless him. And is that not what Torah says, Ryan?
I was just thinking, it's not like this is the first time God does this. He plucks out a man, Abram, takes him to a land, and what does he do to him immediately? He takes away his food, and he has no progeny. And I wonder if there was an accuser up there who's like, well, yeah, he left, but he took his dad with him, and he's not going to follow you. And you wonder if it's the same thing. And you can question, why does God do this? We get this wrong view of it because we see Satan as his rival, and Job on like, oh, well, I don't care if he gets hurt if I get to show you that he's going to follow.
And we'll visit some of that next week. We tag that as a definite part, but we'll hit some of that next week. But yeah, so that's an excellent point. Did I let you finish?
We'll get to it later. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's just like Joseph, all he went through for a purpose.
Absolutely. And that's exactly right. So we're left to God bringing this conclusion of moral wisdom that He is able to run the universe and make decisions that seem unjust. I mean, He did that in the decision room, in the heavenly realm. God made a decision that seemed unjust, didn't He?
Yeah, God blessed Job more in the end than He did for the beginning.
Exactly, and we'll get to that. We'll probably get to that next week because we're going to get to the why that happened as well. But I want to understand that for the here and now, God acknowledges that He has done injustice to Job. But He asks Job to trust the story. And isn't that what we've been talking about from the beginning? Trusting the story, trusting to see, because in the end, and like you said, in the end, we will have, you and Ron both said, we want stored up in the next life our righteousness or however we need to see that, the God's mercy or grace or whatever. Because God invites Job at one point. He says, you take care of this. When the dawn comes up and it shakes the unrighteous from like a rug, he talks about Job shaking the unrighteous off the earth, that there would be none left. By your principle, Job, they'd all be gone. So you judge the world. See how many's left.
Hey, John,
Yes.
when you think of
allowing Jesus to go to the cross. He was sinless.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone that's mentioned in the Bible is telling their story, their life, the sins that they done. And it's an example for each of us that to try to learn from their wrongs, to try not to do the same thing.
And that's where that leaves us.
We will have a place.
Yeah, it leaves us to understand. And so when we come along and we have a hard time, we have a bad thing happen, we get bad news, we are left with this same dilemma. And so Job is to the extreme. So who in here has lost 10 kids and everything they owned and you know what I mean? This is an extreme case. And that's not, that is on purpose. Because God doesn't want you to say, well, mine is worse than what Job went through. You know, does that make sense? We can never stand back and say, well, what I'm going through is a lot worse than what Job went through. You can't stand back and say that. So whatever place you are in your life, you get to stand back and say, well, look what Job went through. How can I be any different? And how can I not trust the story? So let's start to visit some of this. Let's go to chapter 1 here. I know we've, let's see what else I've got here. We got in the beginning of the book, we think we know why what is happening. So let's just kind of read through. In the land of Uz, there was a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. So when it says in the land of Uz lived a man named Job, that is almost the Bible saying, long, long ago, in a land far, far away. Because there's really, there's no place that you can... It's language that almost wants you to say, okay, it's inviting you into a story. And I'm not in no way saying that this is not a historical setting. I'm simply saying that there is a place, this is kind of the Bible taking you to a place that it's inviting you into a story. And that's what's so beautiful about Job, is it's inviting you into this story and it's drawing you in. And it's taking you into heaven. And it tells what he owns here. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning he would offer sacrifice and burnt offerings for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their heart. This was Job's regular custom. So, not only was Job righteous, Job also wanted to make sure that his children were righteous. So he would, just in case they sinned, he would make offerings for his children, not even knowing whether they had sinned or not. Just in case. So long ago, in a land far, far away, there was a man named Job who was righteous. He was so righteous that not only was he righteous, but he wanted to make sure his kids were righteous. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan, which in Hebrew this says Hasatan, the accuser. So I want to, not say that this isn't Satan, but I also want to say that isn't there some place in your heart sometimes that you doubt something? Let's say you've given a lot of money to an organization and they give you all this feedback of what a good person you are. Is there something in your heart that would say, well, if I stopped giving money, would these people think I was still a good person? Do we have doubts in our early relationships with one another where we say, okay, if I stopped treating my significant other in a way that that gives good rewards, would they stop giving good back to me too? Isn't there some sort of doubt that we struggle with in relationships with one another? And I'm not saying that, but I'm saying what we are invited to here is God looking down and bragging on Job, and the accuser stepping in and saying, but is it just because that you give him good? Isn't that not a valid point? I want to say that this morning. Is that not a valid point? Are you good? Are you a Christian because God has given you good? Yes, in ways. But does that fix your heart? Does that fix who you are? Does that make you want to do right things for right reasons? Or are we Christians, and early on I think a lot of us are these things, are we Christians because we don't want to go to hell, and we're Christians because we want to get good from God? Sometimes we are, and we struggle with that. So I want to make you all understand that the accuser makes a valid point in the heavenly realms. Are you good because you get good from God? Or is there something deeper that holds you to God other than the good things that come? Butch.
Another question you could have, how can people be a Christian and know what the reward is and then quit?
Yeah. Knowing the reward and then quit. But a lot of times, we talk about salvation being in heaven, but a lot of times we don't look at that here on this earth, and so we run into trouble and we're like, well, where's God? And some people can't make it through those moments. And that's where we're at with this book, yes.
And the flip side is that mature Christians, courageous Christians have endured all sorts of suffering and even been willing to be persecuted to death because of the hope they have of an eternal reward. And they have endured
suffering,
unfair things.
Yeah. Absolutely.
At the hands of other human beings, especially.
Yeah.
So we're inspired by a lot of people who endure hardship, either from disease or from other people mistreating them, and somehow they have a strong faith, and
Right. So
we wouldn't see that to that degree unless they went through that.
Exactly. So we'll visit more next week. Thank you all for your attention.